This is Sung Jinwoo's build at the end of Season 1. A lengthy list of skills and items, along with a new title which he gained upon ascending to that Shadow Monarch status. Conqueror of Adversity truly is a fitting title though, since up until now that's exactly what Sung has been forced to go through. I mean, even before he acquired the system and was able to level up, his life as an E-rank hunter could only be described as adverse. It's the way he continually pushes forward without any hesitation though that showcases just how it is he was able to conquer all that. And it's his display of tenacity in the job quest here that was no different and even far more unyielding. That's what we're going to talk about in this cut content here, along with all the other details left out from the season finale. Very quickly before that though, here's one last reminder to check out the Level Up collection, since as soon as Sunday comes it's gonna be gone forever. That's right, there's only 5 days left to secure your tees, hoodie, or hat. They're all designs inspired by solo leveling, and they're professionally printed onto the highest quality heavy cotton shirts we could get our hands on. We also ship internationally, so wherever you are you can pre-order yours by using the link down in the description. So here's one more look at each of the designs and a final tease of myself being a model for it. If you want to see future updates on what our next collections will be, then feel free to follow us on Instagram too. But anyway, Episode 12, Arise, covering chapters 41 to 45 from the manhwa and chapters 49 to 53 from the web novel. After having just defeated Igris, despite Sung's fatigue being at 61, he still found his current status fairly manageable. The health he gained from the helmet gave him a bit more wiggle room, and so long as his fatigue still wasn't at 70 yet, he knew he could still fight at full power for hopefully however long was necessary. Obviously it wasn't long enough, because by the time 5 minutes had gone and passed, Sung would find himself being suffocated at the bottom of a dog pile of knights. His health was just under 10% now, and it was at this point that he would start remembering all the people who looked down on him. It wasn't just the memories of people like Mr. Kim or Mr. Park, but also the general comments from pretty much everyone who thought little of him. He remembered all the ridicule he once faced while surviving at the bottom, and it was those voices which pushed him to strive for the peak. He wasn't gonna settle as a C, B, or even A rank hunter because more than anything he wanted to stand at the top. He knew exactly how it felt to be the weakest, so now he wanted to be the strongest. This was mostly because power had always been far and away from him, but it was also because an opportunity to prove everyone wrong had presented itself. So regardless of whether his health was at 10 or 1, Sung was committed to fighting till the end. Even if his muscles tore and his bones turned to dust, he would continue to struggle using every part of his body available to him. It was this sudden burst of determination that allowed him to escape the dog pile, but as the fight pressed on and his fatigue neared its limit, the knights which were dropping in only 1 hit were now starting to take 2 or 3. It was a good way to display how the fatigue started to affect him, since in addition to his mind and body becoming slower, so too did his attacks become weaker in a way that's visibly noticeable. This didn't really bother Sung though, since no matter how many hits it took, he would just continue to strike until his targets did go down. Eventually that number would be at 4 to 5 hits, and it was at this point that a countdown would become increasingly apparent to him. It was a countdown he didn't recognize as one for the penalty quest, but instead thought it to be a timer signifying his death. This is where the novel takes Sung's determination to a whole new level, since in the face of death he could only say good. Despite thinking his life would end in only a few seconds, not a single part of him was ready to give up yet. This is in contrast to Sung from the manhwa and anime, since in both those you can get a sense of his fear and anxiety. There's a clear worry that this might be the end for him, and it's all the more apparent when he's lying there about to be executed. Sung in the novel never really portrays this worry, and instead only displays that never give up attitude. It was an unyielding determination that some might describe as borderline insanity. Like, Sung knew he was about to lose the system, yet the only thing he could think of was how he was going to make use of every last second of it. Even as his body reached that limit in which he couldn't even move anymore, he still found it within him to reach towards the unattainable. There wasn't that shadow version of himself looking down on him as he faced defeat, but instead just himself and his own thoughts of how he felt he could still fight for a little bit longer. Now, the manhwa does add its own extra bit with his shadow version, and it's a simple statement of how Sung just wasn't ready yet. It was a declaration that he was still miles away from what he wanted, and if he truly wanted to attain it, he'd have to kill more, make sacrifices, and even abandon those closest to him. I believe this to be Sung coming to terms with what he's been avoiding, since up until now it's been as if the system has been pushing him towards this. It never outright says that he has to do these things, but as Sung said himself, the stronger he gets, the more detached he feels. So, though he may want to keep the parts of him that makes him human, perhaps deep down he knows he'll eventually have to abandon them. Perhaps this was just his deepest fear manifesting in front of him. In any case, the countdown which, as we saw, saved his life would transport Sung 90 fatigue and all. I don't think the anime portrays just how unbearable 90 plus fatigue is though, since he kinda just got up and patted himself into shape again. As for Sung in the novel, 90 fatigue meant he couldn't even lift a finger. The core effects were difficult breathing and incredibly strenuous movements, so for Sung that meant getting up was pretty much impossible. In fact, just opening the shop and drinking the potion was tremendously difficult, so much so that he had to do the entire thing lying down. It was once he did that he could finally move again, but because his health was below 10%, recovery by potion just wasn't possible anymore. You see, just like how healing magic can't heal injuries if they're too severe, so too did health potions not restore health if Sung was missing too much. It was good he figured out such a mechanic right now, since if there was ever a time when he really needed to drink a potion, doing so above 10% was now essential. Now, it was once the centipedes started to appear that Sung would find them a lot less intimidating. Reason being that, despite their red names, their movements just seemed so incredibly slow now. Much to the point that Sung knew he didn't even have to be bothered by them anymore. The only thing he found himself thinking when he saw this was actually whether there'd be enough of them to level up with. Of course, this meant he couldn't take any damage while doing so, but that too was inconsequential to him. If anything, it was more just like an additional condition he needed to abide by. One more rule making his no-hit level up speedrun a little bit harder. Sung had actually timed how long it would take just to kill one of them, and to his surprise it was a grand total of 17 seconds. The monsters which he fled from only a few weeks ago were now being slaughtered in less than a minute, effectively confirming his strength was far greater than what it was when he fought the Cerberus. Part of this improvement came with his new critical attack skill, and it was that which made felling the centipedes so much easier. In fact, the number of times he used it had actually caused it to level up right here. It was 4 hours later that Sung would be level 51 now, and in addition to purchasing Nightkiller for its situational damage buff, he'd also purchased wrappings in order not to lose it. After having lost the teleportation stone earlier on, Sung decided it would be best to err on the side of caution now. The anime made it seem like he was just wrapping his hands, but in actuality he was wrapping Nightkiller to his hand. It was a precautionary measure which ensured he wouldn't drop it. He considered doing the same for Kasuka's fang with his left hand, but rather than fight like he was some kind of necromorph, Sung figured it would be a bit too inconvenient to lose both his hands. He would then test out Ruler's hand to see what he could and couldn't manipulate with it, and the extent of that was limited by his proficiency with it. The mechanics behind it were simply an advanced form of mana manipulation, so if Sung wanted to become better at using it, he first needed to become more familiar with mana in general. The easiest way to perceive it is as Sung using mana to take control of something. The mana is dispersed from the surrounding air, and it's then wrapped around whatever object Sung wants to manipulate. That object would then be caught in a strong field of magical energy, and it would only move if Sung wanted it to, given of course his proficiency is at a high enough level. Now, it was right before leaving the penalty zone that a prompt would come up indicating a change for the next one. Because he had hunted in this one, the next penalty quest was gonna be harder. Its difficulty would be adjusted to a more appropriate level for him. Sung shuddered at the thought of what that might entail, but perhaps it was something he may never actually have to find out. It was when Sung was fighting the knights after this that a slight distinction needs to be made about them. Reason being that the way the anime portrayed them made it seem like they were each their own individual entities. This wasn't actually the case though, since an observation of their behavior revealed that they were all nothing but puppets. Empty husks all being controlled by the mages who had summoned them. So long as the mages' spells continued, so too would the knights continue to move as well. If they were to stop and cast something else, then all the knights would pause and be lifeless again. It was a revelation Sung had come to when he used his stealth skill, since the activation of the recon spells made all the knights go stationary. At first he thought it was simply because they had lost track of him, but in actuality it was because no one was controlling them anymore. They had lost connection to the mana pulling their strings, and that in turn made them like cars without a driver. This was immediately confirmed after Sung had managed to kill one of the mages, since the moment it died, a large portion of the knights chasing him just dropped. There were a few hundred of them that instantly collapsed into an empty set of armor again. This made the mages the #1 priority as it turned the quest from 1 versus an army to 1 versus 5. It had pretty much been 1 versus 5 from the very beginning. So, it was as Sung would cut his way to those 5 that the manhwa would show how it is Nightkiller was perfect for this. In one panel we see Kasuka's straight edge bouncing off the armor, whereas the next it's Nightkiller cutting right through it. This is because Nightkiller's serrated edge prevents it from sliding the same way that Kasuka's does. Its jagged sawtooth blade allows it to bite into the tougher materials. This is a neat detail highlighting the two daggers' differences, and I like that it's not just showed via the stats. What I mean is that they could have just designed a cool dagger and said it was effective against knights, but instead Nightkiller was designed with application in mind. An interesting detail I only had an appreciation for after seeing these two panels here. This gave Sung an appreciation for his purchase as well, because from what he knew about video games, shop items weren't usually anywhere near this useful. He knew the best items could only ever be found by going out into the wild. So, for Nightkiller to be so much stronger than his last dagger, Sung found himself thinking gold was a lot more valuable than he initially thought it to be. It clearly provided far better weapons than any he could purchase from the real world, leading Sung to wonder how much money he could make if he just bought out the shop then sold those items. Since they didn't have the same non-transferable rule as his potions, the equipment from the shop weren't limited to only his possession. So this idea was both completely valid and extremely profitable. Of course, this wasn't what Sung should have been thinking about, since the entire time he was still fighting the knights, mowing them down as he inched closer and closer to the mages. There was clearly a far less serious approach than before though, since even when the mages worked together to summon that massive golem, Sung was neither intimidated nor worried. He was simply impressed at how cool their magic was. Impressed and eager to finally get to the end of all this. The manhwa keeps that more serious tone from the anime though, and even has him get stabbed from behind at one point. He had also learned a new skill called dagger toss, but that was simply a result of him throwing his dagger that one time. The actual ability just applies bonus damage whenever a dagger is thrown, so it's really nothing all that special. Now, the job quest would finish pretty much as we saw, and the system would bring up all the prompts exactly as they appeared in the anime. What started out as words Sung couldn't agree more with quickly turned into confusion and eventually straight up panic. By the time the class had been revealed, Sung was literally going through the 5 stages of grief. He was so distraught that denial, anger, bargaining, and depression all came and went. It wasn't so much the fact that Necromancer just didn't fit his build though, but was instead a problem of how he'd be perceived by society. You see, if his army truly was to be composed of the undead, then by that logic it would mean his soldiers would be made of bones and corpses. This would definitely not sit well with anyone in the real world, since a hunter leading an army of death wasn't, well, marketable. In a world where society treats hunters as celebrities, the hunter Sung wanted to become had no place for this type of incompatibility. This is why he rejected it the first time, but with a little convincing, Sung was able to see past this. Obviously, the system wanted him to consider otherwise, so when taking into account its constant push towards anything that makes him stronger, Sung knew it wouldn't offer him a class that wasn't powerful. In fact, if hidden classes were just hunters who had special abilities, then Sung knew for the most part those were mainly support class hunters. There were hunters who could buff others or create barriers, but it was very rare that you'd have an offensive ability like the one that Bake had. So if this hidden class was being advertised as one similar to that, then perhaps Necromancer was more powerful than he thought. Perhaps it was being offered to him because the system knew he wanted more power. It was when he approached the class from a lens like that that Sung's heart started to race at the prospect of what it could become. Like, if it truly was an opportunity to gain a special power all while in the combat class, then the level at which he could grow for himself was unimaginable. He could only glimpse at the potential of what a frontline mage supported by an army was capable of. The idea of soloing B-rank gates and higher wasn't just a dream anymore. So, it was after considering the full extent of what this class meant for him that Sung would finally accept it and advance into the Shadow Monarch, a superior version of Necromancer he assumed he would have had to unlock anyway. Fortunately, he had earned it now, and along with it came the skills of Shadow Extraction and Shadow Storage. Shadow Extraction creates the soldiers by extracting mana from a recently deceased target, while Shadow Storage allowed them to be stored within his shadow. They can be summoned freely at 0 cost to him, then absorbed back whenever he wanted. The number he can store is always less than the number he can extract, but if there was ever a time when a battlefield was riddled with targets for Shadow Extraction, those extra numbers would certainly make a difference, even if they were only going to be present for that battle specifically. Sung would then inspect his shadows and test their obedience, and to his surprise, they were far more corporeal than he imagined. The armor they wore wasn't just for show, as upon his touch he could feel metal. The same went for their weapons too, so it was as if the knights were the same but just in shadow form. Igris's extraction went a little different from the anime because, unlike how the anime made it seem like Igris was rejecting him, the novels described it as the other way around. Sung knew his chances were likely all just based on probability, but he felt for some reason perhaps he just wasn't expressing enough desire. He felt perhaps it was him who just wasn't trying hard enough. So, it was after Sung would close his eyes and focus that his next look at Igris would show something peculiar. The black smoke which was emanating from his corpse clearly and visibly outstretched itself as if reaching towards Sung. Sung could never be certain for sure, but it was almost as if Igris was reaching his hand towards him, almost like he was holding it out as if to ask Sung to rescue him. This is a stark difference from the denial and subsequent plea in the anime, but I respect both since they're equally fitting. I mean, Sung's speech may have been a bit more epic in the anime, but I like the idea of Igris not wanting his essence to be lost to the void too. I imagine it relates to the sounds of pain he heard from the other shadows, so perhaps the state they're in when they're waiting for extraction is a kind of sentient limbo. One where the only two options are to become a shadow soldier or turn to nothing. It would explain how it is Igris was able to make the kind of expression he did. Now, it was when Igris did finally get extracted that his level was 7 and rank Knight. The enhanced level was a result of shadow strengthening, and this was simply a buff that could occur upon extraction sometimes. As for his rank, this simply meant he was strong enough to gain the privilege of being named. It was the minimum rank required to earn such a thing. But yeah, that was pretty much everything from the finale of Solo Leveling. Season 2's already been confirmed, and I suspect it will be out either in October or January. Overall, I think the anime did a fantastic job, so I can't wait to see more of what A1 Pictures has to offer for it. I want to think this might become its new baby like how Sword Art Online did. Now, don't forget the Level Up collection is only available till this Sunday, so if you want to secure yours before it's gone forever, be sure to check out the link down in the description. As for what'll come after, I think it might be something like the New Beginnings collection. But anyway, as usual, I just want to thank you all for the support during the Solo Leveling era, and I hope you'll stick around for the next 3 months of Mushoku Tensei. That's the main show I'll be covering until June, and perhaps in between I'll do a little bit of slime too. Until then though, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!